Hello, everyone. My name is Bonnie. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm the Poetry Event Coordinator here at Brookline Booksmith. Today, it is my pleasure to host two wonderful poets, Carolina Hotchandani and Indran Amirthanayagam, for an evening of poetry. Before I do introductions, I have just a few housekeeping notes. Firstly, copies of the poets' books are going to be available for sale at the back counter over there. I encourage you to support their work in whatever way you can. Being here is a lovely way to support them. Saying nice things to them while you're here. And also buying books, following them online. Thank you for supporting poetry. It's huge. It means a lot. Secondly, please keep your phones off or on silent in order to be respectful of our poets sharing their work. Please know that this event is being live streamed on this iPad right here. Hello to YouTube. Our audience members should not be visible to our YouTube viewers, but if you don't want to be live on YouTube, just don't stand in front of it and you will be golden. And finally, we will have a Q&A at the end of the event, so hold your questions until the end, but definitely have them ready to go. This is part of our poetry reading series. We offer a monthly reading series called Third Thursdays Poetry, in addition to other poetry programmings like what you're seeing tonight. Our Third Thursdays Poetry event is listed on our website for May if you're interested in checking that out and curious about our other poetry events. Without further ado, let's get into introductions. Carolina Hotchandani is a Latinx South Asian poet born in Brazil who's lived all over the country. She is the author of the book Eaters, which was the 2023 Perugia Press Prize winner, and was one of the 10 debut poetry books featured in Poets and Writers Magazine's 2024 debut poets issue. She earned her BA in English Literature from Brown and a PhD in English from Northwestern University. You can find her poetry in places like The Atlantic, Agni, Beloit Poetry Journal, Missouri Review, Prairie Schooner, and many other places. She's been the recipient of awards and fellowships from the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, Rona Jaffe Foundation Awards, Community of Writers, Tin House, and the Napa Valley Writers Conference. She's currently a Goodrich Assistant Professor of English in Omaha, Nebraska, where she lives with her husband and daughter. Carolina, thank you so much for coming out from Nebraska to be here tonight. Let's give Carolina a warm welcome. And of course, Indran Amirthanayagam is a poet, editor, publisher, translator, YouTube host, and diplomat. For 30 years, he worked for his adoptive country, the United States, on diplomatic assignments in Africa, Asia, Europe, and North and South America. He writes in English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Haitian Creole, and has published 24 books, including Isleño, The Migrant States, The Elephants of Reckoning, which was winner of the 1994 Patterson Poetry Prize, Uncivil War, and The Splintered Face, Tsunami Poems. He edits the Beltway Poetry Quarterly and has received fellowships from the Foundation for the Contemporary Arts, the New York Foundation for the Arts, the U.S.-Mexico Fund for Culture, and the MacDowell Colony. His latest books include Poet of the Port and Origami, Selected Poems of Manuel Ulicia. Indran, thank you so much for being here tonight. Folks, we are in for a really lovely evening of poetry. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to hand it off to Carolina to share her work with you all.
Thanks so much for being here. It's nice to see some familiar faces in the audience. I was really pleased to travel to the East Coast. It looks like the trees are flowering here, and we've already been through this phase in Nebraska. It ended about a month ago. I figure it's wonderful to just keep going north, and then you can relive spring over and over again, which is my favorite season, and it's just always so short. So anyway, thank you for having me. For the invitation. I'm going to be reading primarily from my book, The Book Eaters, and then a couple of new poems at the end. The first poem is called Self-Portrait as a Woman Halved. What seems a long time ago A line of pigment drew itself down the middle of my torso, linea nigra, splitting the globe of my belly into hemispheres. I am east and I am west, child of parents from both sides of the world. Brazil is my mother's motherland, land of the pau-brasil, the tree that gave the country its name, its red sap extracted by those who were enslaved. They powdered the sap to make a dye, connoting power in European fabrics. Power powder. My father is Indian, land of cinnamon and clove, land of the spices the Portuguese sailed east for, land of the tea the English mass-produced, so that Indians now drink it with milk, as my father does, as I've learned to do. The line that breaks me in two is neater than I thought natural things could be. Once the baby's born, the thin strip slowly fades. But I look at my child, her skin whiter than mine, and feel divided, afraid the world will grant her an ease that keeps her from knowing me. Glad to, for that same reason. So I started writing this book in 2016, and it's actually when I settled in Omaha. And I've now lived in Omaha probably longer than I've lived anywhere else. So this is sort of a poem looking back at all of the moving that I've done and the kind of mindset that, that moving so steadily can create. The boxes. We move. We move every few years. What's made of glass, we wrap in newspaper, boxing memories that for others live in hometowns. Their memories are perennials, sprouting thoughts of years before, when holes were dug, when kids couldn't between irises and alliums, then the irises won, memories of arguments, reconciliations, purpling that summer. We move in trucks, in boxes, our contents, 4 continents, and who knows how many cities, rooms, drawers. How many corners of us are emptied in the new town, free of the objects left at the last town's goodwill. We miss the goodwill of old friends. Memories stretch from the last place, the way I grocery store, the whole pyramid of them toppling over, bruised, rolling. Memories of things falling do not exist in neat arrangements on display tables. Do not gleam on the waxed skins of red delicious apples, assembled in the same spot in the same store we visit for years. We don't have the years. We store the store, our memories rolling to the next town, where some sense of not belonging lives under my hot cheeks as I overhear a girl tell another girl, the eyebrows of the new girl are like the tail of a squirrel. I hear the giggles. I feel the apples, bruised, rolling through my body, which is no grocery store. The floor of me does not shine. I am not lit with bright lights. I am the boxes we take to the next place, which tear and are taped. When my father starts to forget, I understand. The places never held us. We hold the places. We move. So when my father kind of started to lose his memory and experience cognitive decline, the forgetting of words was the first thing that we noticed. This poem is called Portrait of Aphasia on a Plum Tree. Was it not then, as you reached for a word, like a ball you'd kicked high into the plum tree's grasp? and failing to seize it, said, "Forget it." So the words stayed there, suspended with the overripe plums, warming in the sun beside the nest of a bird neither of us could name, though the problem of forgetting was not mine. Was it not then that silence filled the space where the word might have bounced, like this, like here, like so? And so I left my body like a ball in motion, as the absence of your thought condensed into a pit, as of a plum I swallowed, till it burrowed in my chest, like a solid thing a word could almost name. And in the next poem, the you that I'm addressing is my father. It's clear if you read the book. He, in pre-partition India, moved southward from what's now Pakistan to what's now India after partition, and he had a lot to say about it, and I would often get long lectures about history and religion. My brother and I would, and we were often just the kind of captive audience of these lectures. So this poem kind of describes that dynamic. Partition. In your version of the story, people butter their fingers with notions of God, splitting India into a smaller India, a new Pakistan. The way a single roti's dough is pulled apart, the new spheres rolled in the palms, then flattened. The idea of God, the destroyer of humanity, will say. The reason for new borders, new pain to sprout on either side of a dividing line. You'll go on. I'll picture the edges of your words blurring to a hum as I think of how to wrest your rant from you. A rolling pin barrels over dough, widens the soft disc, makes it fine. You are fragile, like a story that stretches belief, like a nation, like a thin disc of dough that sticks to a surface, tearing when it's peeled back. I don't know how to part the story from the person and keep the person. I don't know if it's a common thing these days to have kids in junior high create edible cell models, but it was certainly an assignment that I had in junior high. This was called Memory Halved. I remember creating an edible model of a cell when I was 12. My parents helped. We gathered jelly beans, dry noodles, poppy seeds. In a clear, round casserole dish, peach jello congealed, turned to cytoplasm. Circus peanuts from last year's Halloween metamorphosed into mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, my textbook said, as they extract energy from food, deriving from one substance another. We are always making doubles of what exists, replicas of real things, memories that try to copy experience, even as they tweak the color of a dress, the weather the day of a funeral, and whether we were even there at all. I remember fashioning the nucleus from a hard-boiled egg I cut in two. I know, even as my father forgets whole years of my life, that I am more than partly loved. But I recall my shock when he reached for the half of the nucleus I didn't use and took a bite. self-portrait as a woman's intention to write. Once she gives birth, once the feeding's over, once the baby sleeps, once the crying stops, once the clothes are clean, once the piles are folded, once her old clothes fit, once the mind is clear, once the baby babbles, once intention buds, once fatigue fades, once the new day starts, once her body's hers, once the toddler speaks, once an hour cracks open, once the words surround her, once a poem grips her, once the child's at school, once the woman's cry is louder than the child's. This next poem is my daughter's favorite in the book. She is now 9 and she understands this one. And when I have readings and she's there, she kind of sits up a little straighter when I say that I'll read this one, because she feels like none of you have poems written for you. So this one is called Small Green Bowl. At 18 months, my daughter says, "Do you want more?" When she wants more grapes, more blueberries, more cubes of cheese to fill her small green plastic bowl. Do you want to get up? Do you want to go out? Do you want to listen to that song? These are the questions I ask her, which she repeats. No I comes to fill the small green plastic bowl. Mama speaks of herself as Mama, and Mama's child is always you. As you learn to search yourself for the small green plastic bowl, I find an I, as do you. We fill the bowl together with cold berries. The next poem that I'll read is the most recently one. It's the one I wrote most recently in this collection. And I wrote it at Community of Writers conference last summer. And one of our audience members was here, was there with me when I wrote this poem. And I was, after this book was accepted, I basically, the day after, well, sorry, I'm getting a little lost. After I declared this manuscript complete, that was like October of 2022. The day after that, my father actually passed away, and he's, a very significant figure in this book. And so then I had this sort of question that I had to wrestle with, which was, do I even try to edit death into the manuscript? And I did try, and I wrote this one and managed to kind of squeeze it into the book just before it was printed. So this one is called Order of Operations. You try to follow your father's dictum. Stay ahead. Cover next week's chapter in Algebra Now. So when the teacher delivers the lesson in the future will be a memory for you, the word problem you've already solved. A family travels in a train at a velocity X miles per hour greater than a car. From inside the train, the car seems to slip slowly backward, like salmon swimming against the current to spawn. But you are not chasing time to make life. As you speed through the weeks to the destination, you try to quantify the benefit of an earlier arrival. You need to know why, in the textbook of your life, the order of operations insists that you cry for your father before he dies, so when he dies, you are prepared. You'll live in the memory of pain, which is not pain. It's a family moving forward on a train. so the next two are very recently written. This one was published in the Atlantic in January. A poem for falling bodies. I practice calling up the past for reassurance. Events outlast themselves. That a day of no great personal gain or loss inscribes itself somewhere. The way I keep in my mind two snakes entwined and falling to my feet as I walked under an oak tree one July. The way I ran down the hill as if the snakes cared enough to chase me. The way that moment stalks me, its tongue flickering even now, as I pass under certain boughs and fear or feel a thud of what's not there, which twists around what is, the air, the leaves, the roots that weave in and out of the mud, serpentine and mingling with the past to make a rain of snakes forever possible. I need to believe that ordinary trees from which no bodies fall can leave an imprint, furrow my brain with their forgettable gray branches in the middle of winter, all the leaves having already dropped from them. And this last one, I had a little challenge for myself. I wondered if I could write a poem about grading papers. Spent a long time grading papers. So here it is. Vicarious. A goat bleats under the bamboo house in my student's essay. There is a space between her house and the ground where the family of goats resides. Through gaps between the floor planks, the goats stutter into her dreams. She knows the squeal of the newborns, mouths, the narrow apertures don't let her see. She knows their hunger like her brothers, its invisible strings pulling their mother to him to nurse in the next room. There is a space between the essay I read and the margins where, in blue ink, I place my wonder. Beautiful, I write. I draw blue asterisks beside sentences that flood my senses. The stars bring me back like crocuses opening through snow. In the peripheries, I mark myself being marked by my student. I set down a grade, an A, a stamp of my evaluative power. Between that family of goats and myself, there are oceans, continents. Between the typed page and me, envy. I cannot write about goats I've never known. I know I should not steal the goats. Nothing is worse than a goat thief. Alas, that is what I am. Goat thief. I'll leave you with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm, remembering my mother today, who passed away recently. Remembering my father too. And my father was a poet, among other things. He was also a good friend of Allen Ginsberg. And he introduced me to Allen when I was 17 in Hawaii, in Honolulu. So I had a sort of poetic father, two poetic fathers. And thinking of Allen, I've been teaching a course on his poetry recently. I thought I'd begin, for the first time in my life, playing the instrument Allen used to play, the shruti, and singing or reciting his his famous poem and song, Father Death Blues. And then I will read from Hotchandani, Poet of the Port. So this is an experiment. We'll see how it comes out. Hey, Father Death, I'm flying home. Hey, old man, you're all alone. Hey, old daddy, I know where I'm going. Father Death, don't cry anymore. Mama's there underneath the floor. Old Uncle Death, please mind the store. It's just a taste. That's how the poem begins. Do look for it. It's the most beautiful poem, elegy, I think, for a father. And he wrote it after his father died. His father was Louis Ginsberg, who was also a poet. And then, of course, for his mother, he wrote the poem Kaddish, which is a magnificent poem, long line poem. So it was not quite all of Father Death Blues, but just a little taste. I'm going to read from Hotchandani, Poet of the Port, which I wrote in Haitian Creole, when I lived in Haiti. And I wrote these poems in 2016 and 2017. And I was very beloved in Haiti. I felt very much at home. And I continued to write for a Haitian newspaper, Haiti en Marche, a poem every week in French or sometimes in Creole. And I know the country is in crisis, and I know that the Haitian resilience will pull through. Gérer. When pas vle sentim triste, when pas vle penser à dernier mam famim, derniers oiseaux, dernière fois, when we mon na glace, même les ou pas cri, when m'a composé bel poème, pour quelques minutes m'a visité l'autre monde, côté m'ka gérer, et puis contrôler la pluie, ak soleil là. Manage. I do not want to feel sad, thinking of the last remember, last bird, last time I can see a mountain covered with ice. But when you do not write, at least I can compose a poem. Minutes, visit another world where I know how to manage rain and sun. Now, throughout this book, there are certain motifs. One is the month of August, and another is the hat. Now, in Haiti, the country without a hat is the afterlife. So I've always tried to keep my hat on, because I want to hold on to this particular existence. And then August was the month I was supposed to leave, a purely arbitrary month. It happened to be, for me, a month full of sadness and nostalgia, and because I had to leave, my job was finished. I somehow managed to hold on to Haiti for one more month into September, but that's irrelevant to the poems. August. August has come without a breeze or lightning, without a protest in the streets. We waited for this August since finishing the manuscript, before my leaving for the other side, falling in love with another girl. August can arrive again for somebody else. August means nothing to readers not aware that August arrived, then it will go. Bye-bye, see you later, take my hat. Meditation under the tree. So I'll read sometimes the Creole as well, but as you wish. Meditation under the tree. I think of you at every moment of the day, even if there are others in the world, other wars to fix. It is always like this. Inspiration takes blood, sweat, absolute compromise, until love arrives, exhausted from running fast, pressed in the course that life sets. Stop already, take a breath. We are there even if in our heads we visited the country without a hat. Even if obsession with love flourishes in your poem, because the poet Maudit must write about the flower wilted, punched, destroyed. Perhaps one can change themes like a lizard, its skin. I sit in the leaves of the tree. I'm waiting for you. Nobody can see me except you, because I think I see you still. A friend of mine in Haiti happens to be a writer, now lives in France. He started calling me Haitien or Haitian. That's a kind of calling name. So I wrote this poem called Haitien. Haitien, comment nous y ou écrit en langue et puis ou remène at monu ou défier désespoir à qui on m'écoute plein proverbe ou danser compas ou chita beau la main à qui on wom et puis on sourit dans zile oublie qui avance yon tigras après mémoire gouffre toi l'amour haïtien restez ici là avec nous haïtien restez ici là avec nous. Haitian, how are you? You write in our language and you love with our words. You defy despair with a backpack full of proverbs. You dance compas. You sit beside the sea with a rum and a smile in this forgotten island that advances just a little after remembering gulf, pit, and death. Haitian, stick around here with us. Haitian, stick around here with us. You all remember that, well, I've read about the 2010 earthquake, which is a sort of a central figure in the imagination about Haiti. But there have been other earthquakes. 2017, there was another earthquake when I was there. And one of the things I'm most proud of as a diplomat from the United States was able to bring the Martha Graham Dance Company to Haiti as part of our aid package. You see, I don't think of Haiti as a place that needs tents only, or security forces, or, advice on how to construct a democracy. I think Haiti, was one of the, right after our independence, Haiti got its independence. Called itself the first Black Republic. Haitians helped Simon Bolivar in his battle from the Spanish crown in Latin America. By boat from Colombia to Haiti, it takes 7 hours by a modern, people, which is also a problem now because of the drug shipments, that go that way. Anyway, so I was struck by the pride of the Haitian people, despite all of the mistakes they have also made over these years. And we also have made, because we, as in the United States, occupied the island from 1914 to 1933. I mean, that's a long time. Universal Island. Will you give me a discharge? My stay will end, heartbroken, friendships built even so. Belly not big enough to keep all the marvelous food Haiti has fed me. Strong sun this morning, wind up to sweep body and spirit. Door open, cemetery full of memories, but always the story of the return. As long as I can walk, and even afterwards in a wheelchair, like so many other Haitians on the flight from to Port-au-Prince. The island song is stronger than me. My father died on the other side. The other side for me is an idea from the Old Testament. Everybody is somebody. Every island is Haiti. Somewhere else in this book I have a poem about Creole, proposing it as a language for the United Nations, I mean, why do we have to have the official languages only be English or Chinese or Russian or French? I mean, there's no logic. Why not Haitian Creole? Or why not Tamil? I mean, languages that I'm familiar with, at least, though I don't remember Tamil. So, another part about Haiti for me is the avocado. Now in Haiti, the avocado is this size. I mean, it's a marvel. It's a marvel. And the season is a season of plenty. It's like in other countries, you have the season of plenty of frangipani, the plumeria flowers falling, marriages taking place. For me, Haiti in that season is the season So in the word in Creole is avocat. So tan avocate fini, the season of avocados, the avocado season is over. I translated these poems into English, and I'm not so sure I did a very good job with this one, but I'll read you the English. And I'll tell you one other thing, if you don't mind. Rancorn Butte is the name of the album. Some of these poems you can hear on Spotify and other places, because I recorded them with Haitian friend musicians when I was leaving Haiti. The last 2 months of my stay, we used to go to a studio and record these songs, about a dozen, and the album is called Rancorn Butte. And the day I left, I got the CD. You know, it was a wonderful gift. Now all of this, you see, Haiti is not only the gang violence and all that. I mean, there are publishers there, publishers of poetry, for example. There's a publisher waiting to restart its presses when this period of darkness, you know, is finished. The season of avocados is over. The most beautiful girl in town is about to marry a man across the water. My brother is busy with his manuscript. Time to share ideas in a book has gone to the country without a hat. Accept reality. Don't live anymore in fantasy. You're getting along in years, but you're only 3 in Creole. You have a great long life ahead. Think, reflect, tell all the new families, congratulations, good luck, then write again about your life in Haiti when the avocado was in bloom. Avocate fini, pi belle fille en ville, la at marié at moun l'autre beau. Frère m'occupé à manuscrit li. Temps pour partager l'idée nan livre d'aller nan pays sans chapeau. Accepter réalité. Pas vie plus dans fantasy. Ou gen quelques années, men seul toi nan créole. Ou gen toute yon vie devant penser, réfléchir, dit toute nouveau famille. Félicitations, bonne chance. Et puis écrit l'autre fois, Sauvé en Haïti. Les avocats fleuris. Sauvé en Haïti, les avocats fleuris. That's pure music, you know, for a poet. Poetry for me is word music. You hear that, les avocats fleuris, it's a song. And it just means when the avocado was in bloom. This one's called Avel, with you. I want to write in Creole. I must not let melancholy take my spirit. I have a cool head, although my head is hot. I thank you for your trust, for sharing words with me, for your love. I am strong thanks to your energy. No one is alone on the earth. I am with you. You see, that cool and hot, and that's also in Whitman, you know. It's the contradiction that we live with, or the duality that we live with. And I must admit, I do place a special weight on poetry as a route out of the labyrinth, you know, way out. So here, this one's called At Least Poetry. En moins poésie. It is easy to share the reason for my visit with you, great potentate. You are my brother. We don't keep secrets. Everything that happens to me happens to you. But the proverb does not make sense in reverse. I wait for you every evening at home, where silence is my only company. Even birds disappeared from the tree outside my window. But now I'm thinking of a solution, like my friend who has a cage full of birds, small, big, tikit, nightingales. I can do the same, but in my cage I will hang poems on posters, the dream of friendship, blowing in verse. I wrote that poem thinking of a dear friend of mine with whom I ended up writing a book in Creole, which is gone out of print, but it exists somewhere, called Poésie à Quatre Mains, poetry, four-handed poetry. Alex Laguerre, who wrote the preface to the book. But he would never, I got him to come home just once, but we were so close, we would see each other all the time. Poem, unless you'd like to hear 2 brief poems, or we have time to leave some time for questions. This one's called espace sacré, sacred space. Into the sacred space, neither friends, nor brothers, nor prostitutes, nor presidents can enter. The only visitors you'll find are metaphors that can sing and dance to the cadence of banjo and drum. Espace sacré. Nan espace sacré pas qu'à entrer ni amis, ni frères, ni bousins, ni chani, ni président. Seul visiter ou joindre ces métaphores cap chanter, danser sous cadence banjo ak tambour. All right, I'll finish with one more. Broke my own rule. Daybreak. I think it's a good way to finish on this because I am always eternally at daybreak, despite what's going on in the world, despite the horrors. And they are real horrors. I saw a program last night. 2 doctors, American doctors, working in the ICU of the only remaining hospital in Rafah, trying to save children who are mostly not, they could not save them. So their sadness is in their words, that we can only save 1 out of 5, those with these severely burnt. But yet, daybreak, and yet the chance for peace or the hope, daybreak. My heart is strong, renewed after writing yesterday. My heart is strong, renewed after writing yesterday evening, like after making love or eating rice with Lalo or seeing my little girl again in her childhood home. My heart is strong, ready to handle the day. Came when 4, my heart is strong. Pre okembeju, ready to handle the day. Thank you very much. Merci. A little more. If you keep in touch with me, maybe in about a year's time, I'll be playing proper tunes on this.
Thank you both so much for sharing
Thank you.
your wonderful work. Now is the audience's time to shine. But before we started with our Q&A, I do have an opening question for you both. I was just curious if you could talk a bit about your writing process and how it's changed or developed the more that you write, and just give everybody a little introduction to how you approach your writing.
Want me to go first? Well, I write often from the news, There's a category called the news poem. There's a place called the New Verse News, which publishes poems on sort of politically progressive themes, and I often publish there. I also publish at a place called Brown Views, which publishes articles and poems and various things, usually on Sri Lanka, but it also publishes on other international issues. There's 2 places where I often write these news poems and send them, and they appear. Poems written in the urgency of the moment, where the poem itself is a way of telling the news. Some people may not learn about this, what happened, until they happen to read the poem. Another poem I write is the poem raised in nostalgia, Ceylon no longer exists, the island where I was born. My cousin is here. Now it's Sri Lanka. And I like to say, Ceylon no longer exists. So I come from a country that no longer exists, a way of life that's forever changed. We all come from ways of life that have changed. In a sense, that is part of the movement of life, right? So I write about that. I had a wonderful experience. My first book, The Elephants of Reckoning, the poet Ramanujan wrote a welcome addition to the poetry of migration. So that phrase, the poetry of migration, has stuck with me all my life. Somehow I'm writing the poetry of migration. What happens when you migrate, when you cross borders? I cross linguistic borders too by writing in other languages. So it's just a way of sort of trying to understand. My father used to talk about the cross-cultural encounter, the meeting of cultures and literature. So he was a person who celebrated breaking down barriers and borders between cultures and people. So I think I'm just carrying that idea forward.
I think I'm usually driven to write because of loss or absence, and even the anticipation of loss, and I think that's usually what sends me to the page, and then I often turn to metaphor. I think is a way to kind of make sense of loss, or try to think through it with a present object, and I think that's why I'm drawn to poetry. It's metaphor making, and then sometimes I get a little too far into my own metaphors and have to like root things in reality again. But
thank you both for sharing a bit of your process. And now, if anyone in our audience has any questions for our poets, feel free to raise your hand. Yeah, go ahead.
Specifically for Carolina, I noticed that a lot of your poems are very bodily. I mean, I can't forget the image of the poem about your father's aphasia, the pump that sort of burrows into the body. It doesn't pass in the way we expect it to. I wonder how you approach the process of writing and editing something so bodily, especially when a lot of your poems are, as you said, rooted in loss. It seems like that would be an almost violent process in that you're processing the body into words. Maybe this is how you approach it.
I'm not sure I understand why that would pose a challenge. You know, like writing about loss and writing about the body, why would it make it difficult to edit? I'm curious, what do you think?
I would say, I mean, in thinking about my own process, I would say that in putting the body on the page, you are rendering yourself not only intellectually and in the words, but also physically in a way. And so to, at least in my process, visit moments of pain, or visit spaces in which I felt pain viscerally, even with emotional pain, I experience those quite differently than poems in which I'm dealing only with the intellectual side, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I guess I'll stick to what I said before. I'm not sure that I feel that. I think that when I'm working through something in a poem, it feels like it's just a different sphere. Even though I know that I'm referring to something personal, something bodily, like I guess it does turn into like the idea of the thing, and if it that's the point at which I can work on it, you know, when it I sort of am entering into like a conceptual universe, and then you know, and then sometimes I have to recover the visceral. Sometimes that is the real challenge for me.
Do we have any other audience questions? Yeah. go
So,
right ahead.
like most Americans, I only speak one language, so I can't fathom what it's like to be able to think in 4 or 5 languages. I'm curious whether it's like a season, you're just writing in Haitian and then you're just writing in Spanish, or does a certain subject say, oh no, this should be in English, or how do you navigate between all the languages?
Yeah, very interesting question. I mean, I there was a time when I was writing poems about the war, the civil war in Sri Lanka, in Ceylon, and I wanted to write in English those poems principally because the language is spoken in the island. So I thought the poems would get to be read and digested faster somehow, or contribute to the conversation about that war. But I did write a couple of those poems in Spanish at the time, and then translated them into English, and then sent them for publication. Sometimes I'm obsessed with the language. Like at the moment, I'm obsessed with Portuguese. I listen to Portuguese every day. I watch CNN Brazil on YouTube, and I'm just hearing the Brazilian Portuguese in particular all the time, and that jostles my mind and heart also, and I start writing in Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese. And sometimes I'm And because I have this assignment now where I write in French once a week and another newspaper in Spanish once a week called El Acento in the Dominican Republic. So I have a motivation to write a poem every week in French and one in Spanish. And that's just from practice, and I'm a journalist by training. I actually studied to be a foreign correspondent at Columbia, but then I became a diplomat after some years as a poet and teacher in New York. So I think it's somewhere in me that the need to communicate with the ordinary person, who I define as the person who might read a newspaper article or read online now. Not the academic in the ivory tower, or necessarily, I'm simplifying things, but I don't like to write complicated rhetorical poetry, you know. I don't say that that shouldn't have a space, but I prefer to try and write, as Orwell wrote, you know, when Orwell wrote Animal Farm, or he wrote any of the book, I mean, 1984, whatever, they're all very intelligible. If you just know the language, you can get. So I try to write poetry, like Yeats wrote poetry, or Kavafi, or, you know, Nassim Hikmet. These are the models I've learned from, and I keep learning from. But again, there are times when I think in French. There are times when it's too difficult for me to write outside of English. So English is the strongest of these languages for me. Too difficult, or sometimes I write in English and I translate myself into French or into Spanish if I have little time. And so it's a game, intellectual game as well with myself, which keeps me happy. I hope readers are interested. Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
We do have time for one more question if anyone has one. Oh, yeah.
I have a question that sort of like follows on what you were saying about writing like a poem for an audience, and not trying to write like over rhetorical questions. So this is a question for both of you, just sort of about what's your relationship to like the reader when you're writing these poems, or are you not even necessarily thinking about an or a reader in the act of writing? I've heard some poets say that they're like writing to an audience that doesn't even exist yet, but may exist sometime in the future. And I was like, what does that mean? So I'm curious about how you think about the reader, if at all, or if you have like a particular relationship to the reader in mind as you're writing.
I can take this. I think that usually when I start out, I'm not thinking about the reader. The poems in this book that I started writing were poems about new motherhood. My daughter was at that point 18 months old, and I felt like I was coming out of a strange tornado. And so when I was writing those poems, I was just trying, it was almost like I was trying to find a foothold in life again, and make sense of like, oh my goodness, you know, I had been a thinking person, and now I'm this container of milk, and what in the world, you know, has happened. And so I really was just dealing with how like strange that reality was, and I wasn't thinking at all about publishing. In fact, if I had been thinking about it, I probably wouldn't have written them at all. But then I just kept doing it, and then I thought there was a point at which, you know, when there was something that would happen, like patterns that would be created on the page that felt interesting and alive, then I would think, oh, okay, I guess the thought of a reader comes in, just as I will share it.
I would say, you know, the big things like love and war and work and holiness, or the relationship to God. And these are things that inspire me to write. And then ordinary things and fun, silly things sometimes, you know. I write comic poems sometimes. And I think that's great to do. There's a great poet in Chile, Nicanor Parra, and he wrote, it's called Antipoesia, anti-poem. And you know, one of them, there's a picture he used to draw, and you would have a figure on a cross, and he says, "Boy, y vuelvo. I'm going and I'm coming back." You know, talking about Christ, right? And when I met him the first time, he gave me a little drawing, which unfortunately is gone, but he's written, "Cada uno fracasa a su manera." So everyone fails in his own way. I thought it was a very funny thing to say, to give to the person for the first time. Everyone fails his own way. So, you know, poetry is delight also. It's making fun of the foibles of human existence. And I think about an audience, yes, but that audience, I'm off. I mean, in certain cases, and I wrote a poem, a book called The Splintered Face, Tsunami Poems. I was writing about the tsunami of 2004 and how that affected Sri Lanka in particular, not Indonesia and other places which were even worse hit than Sri Lanka. But Sri Lanka lost about 30,000 people in the morning, you know, and what that meant, the political implications of that, the economic implications, the psychological implications, you know. Like there was one story where, I'm telling stories about this, try to understand this island that had been affected badly by a brutal civil war, now had this ecological war, you know, from the wave. So trying to understand these things through poetry, and for an audience that perhaps went through the same experience and could benefit from it, reading, or have some catharsis reading these poems. When I wrote about the Sri Lankan Civil War, I had a chance to go back to Jaffna in the north and read these poems at the University of Jaffna. And people were crying, and I was crying, and I was reading them in English. Of course, they all understood English, but they had gone through this war in Tamil, and they had survived, the ones who were there. And so it was trauma somehow being unrevealed or dealt with through verse. So poetry is always good for that moment of the memorial and the memorial service, but not only for that purpose. So, yeah.
Some beautiful, beautiful reflections on the role that poetry plays in our lives, both as readers and writers. Carolina, Indran, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for sharing your work for everyone that's listening. It's so wonderful to have you both here, and thank you to our audience for being here, for loving and supporting poetry. It means the world. If you'd like to buy a book, you can do so at the back counter over there, and our poets are going to stick around to sign if you get a copy. And otherwise, thanks so much for being here. It's lovely to have you. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. So good. Likewise. We should